Frontier Foundation. It's a nonprofit based in San Francisco that I've worked for a couple of decades. Some of you may have heard me say this last night. I'm not speaking on behalf of EFF today, unless you agree with me, in which case I am. It's a great pleasure to be here at a science fiction convention. These are the things that I've been going to since I was larvum. I think the first SFCon I went to when I was 15 years old, and I was a gopher at Ad Astra, running coffee for Park Godwin. These days, I speak at a lot of different kinds of events, including cons like this. The talk I'm going to give today is one that I wrote for a con with a different vibe, but related, a con called DEF CON, which is the big hacker convention in Las Vegas. I gave it this summer. It's adapted from that talk. It's not exactly the same, but if you've seen that talk, it's on YouTube and so on. Then this may seem familiar. I apologize in advance if there's a little repetition there. So the talk starts with a semi-rhetorical question, which is, what the fuck happened to the old good internet? I mean, sure, our bosses were a little surveillance happy, and they were usually up for sharing our users' data with the NSA. And whenever there was a conflict between our users' security and the growth of the platform, they always chose growth. But whatever else you can say about that era, Google search used to work. Facebook used to show you posts from people that you followed. Uber used to be cheaper than a taxi, and Uber drivers used to make more than cab drivers. Amazon used to sell you products, not self-destructing, drop-shipped garbage from all consonant brands. Apple used to defend your privacy, not spy on you using an iPhone that you're not allowed to modify. There was a time where someone who searched for an album on Spotify would find the album and not an insipid playlist of AI-generated sound-alikes that have the same title and photo. Microsoft used to sell software. Sure, it wasn't great software, but they would sell it to you. Now they just let you access apps in the cloud. They monitor your usage of those apps. They figure out which features you use the most. They take them out of the free tier, and they give them back to you as an upsell. What, and I cannot stress this enough, the fuck happened? So, of course, I'm talking about enshittification. And from the outside, this is what enshittification looks like. First, you have companies that are good to their end users. Google puts the best search results at the top. Facebook shows you a feed of posts from the people that you've asked to see posts from. Uber charges you small dollars for a cab ride. Amazon subsidizes goods and returns and shipping and puts the best match for the product that you're searching for at the top of the list. That is stage one. Firms are good to users. But there's another part of that stage. We can call it stage 1A, which is when these firms figure out how to lock in those users. Now, there are a lot of ways to lock in users. If you're Facebook, the users do it for you. You joined Facebook because there were people there that you wanted to talk to, and other people joined Facebook because they wanted to hang out with you. That is what we call network effects in action. And with network effects comes something that economists call the collective action problem. You know, you love your friends, but goddamn are they a pain in the ass. And the fact that you all agree that you don't like Facebook doesn't mean that you can possibly agree that it's time to leave Facebook or where you should go next and how to get connected to each other when you get there. You're there because that's where the support group for your rare disease is. Your bestie is there because that's where they talk with the people in the country that they emigrated from. And there's a friend who coordinates their kids' Little League rides there. And the best dungeon master you know, that's where all of our best customers are. And so you're all stuck because even though Facebook use comes at a high cost, you know, your privacy, your dignity, your sanity, that cost is still less than the switching cost of losing touch with everyone you love if you leave Facebook. All those friends that have taken you hostage and whom you are holding hostage in return. Now, sometimes companies have other ways to lock you in. They lock you in with money. Like Amazon gets you to prepay for your shipping in advance. They call it Prime. Or they get you to pay for an audiobook every month in advance. They call it Audible. And which that virtually guarantees that every search is going to start on Amazon. After all, you've already paid for it. Sometimes they lock you in with DRM. HP sells you ink that costs you more than $10,000 a gallon. It's approximately speaking the most expensive fluid on earth. It costs more than vintage Veuve Clicquot. It costs more than the semen of a prize-winning horse. And they use DRM to stop you from refilling any of the 4 cartridges in your inkjet printer, which means that if one of those cartridges runs dry, you have to either refill it or throw away the other 3 cartridges and maybe the printer too. Sometimes firms, they use a grab bag of different tactics to keep you locked into the platform. Like, you can't run an app from the iOS operating system unless you own an Apple iOS device. And you can't run your Apple Music, movies, or books unless you have an iOS app. And your iPhone uses parts pairing, which is digital rights management on the subcomponents themselves, so that you can't get your phone repaired at an independent repair shop. And every one of those parts, those little OEM parts in your iPhone, has a microscopic Apple logo on it, so that Apple can ask Customs and Border Patrol to seize refurbished parts that are brought back into the country after the phones are broken up in the Far East, because they call them counterfeits. And that means that you're just locked into the platform from beginning to end. This is real thinking different. Getting you locked in completes phase 1 of enshittification, and it signals the start of phase 2, which is making things worse for you in order to make things better for the business customers who also use the platform. For example, platforms sometimes, they poison their search results. Like Google's selling more and more of what's above the fold on their search results page to advertisers, and those advertisers are labeled with smaller and smaller and fainter demarcations telling you that it's not an organic search result. Or Amazon, which sells off search results. They call it an ad business. They make $38 billion a year from this. On average, the first result for an Amazon search is 29% more expensive than the best result on Amazon. On average, the first 4 results are 25% more expensive than the best result on Amazon. And on average, you have to go down 17 places to get the best result for your search. Other platforms, they sell off your feed, like Facebook, which started off showing you the things that you asked to see, but now the quantum of content from people and publishers that you've asked to see content from has dwindled to a kind of homeopathic residue. And it's left behind this void that they can fill with things that someone will pay to show you. Boosted posts from publishers you subscribe to, and of course, advertisements. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, sure, of course that's how Facebook works, because if you're not paying for the product, you're the product. Now, this is bullshit. It is absolute bullshit. The people who buy those ads, they pay more every year for ad targeting and get worse fidelity in that ad targeting. They have more ad fraud. The publishers who pay to non-consensually cram content into your eyeballs you never asked to see, they have to do that because Facebook will not show the content that they publish to the people who've actually asked to see it. Amazon sellers with the best match for your query have to outbid everyone else who wants to bid on that search term. It costs so much to sell on Amazon that between 45 and 51% of the sale price of everything you buy on Amazon is kicked back up to Don Bezos and the Amazon crime family. Those sellers do not have the kinds of margins that let them pay 51%. Nobody has 51% margins. They have to raise prices in order to stop losing money on every sale. But you may have noticed that the price on Amazon matches or is better than the price of what you buy everywhere else. There's a reason that this works this way. The reason it works this way is Amazon binds its sellers to something called the most favored nation deal. And under a most favored nation deal, a seller cannot charge more on Amazon than it charges anywhere else. So when it raises its prices on Amazon to avoid losing money, because it has to sell on Amazon because people have bought Prime, and that's where they begin and end their searches. When it raises its prices, it has to raise its prices everywhere else. In its factory store, at Target, at Walmart, at the mom and pop shop down the street. Now, these are Amazon's best customers. They are paying for the product, and they are still getting screwed. Paying for the product does not fill your vapid boss's shriveled heart with so much joy that they decide to stop fucking you over. Look at Apple. Do you remember when Apple offered every iOS user a single box that they could click to opt out of Facebook tracking and tracking from other third-party apps? And 96% of Apple users ticked that box, and the other 4% were either Facebook employees or drunk Facebook employees. And Facebook told its shareholders that this cost them $10 billion in the first year, which, yes, you love to see it. But at the same time, Apple was rolling out its own commercial surveillance program on the iOS platform that gathered the same data that the Facebook app was gathering for the same purpose to feed their own proprietary ad network that competed with Facebook. Now, your iPhone is not an ad-supported gimme. You paid $1,000 fucking dollars for that distraction rectangle in your pocket, and you are still the product. What's more, Apple has rigged iOS so that you cannot legally modify iOS without violating IP law. So even if you're not paying for the product, yeah, you're the product. And even if you are paying for the product, you are still the product. Just ask the farmers who are expected to swap parts into their John Deere tractors when they break. But those parts won't be recognized and start working with their tractors until a John Deere technician comes out and is paid $200 to type an unlock code into the console of the tractor in order to get those parts recognized. Now, John Deere does not give away tractors. You give John Deere $500,000, thank you very much. You give John Deere $500,000 for the product, and you're still going to be the product. So please, my brothers and sisters in Christ, please stop saying if you're not paying for the product, you're the product. Okay, that is phase 2 of enshittification. Phase 1, be good to users while locking them in. Phase 2, screw the users a little so that you can be good to business customers and get them locked in. And then phase 3 is you screw everybody and reap the benefits for yourself and your shareholders. That is enshittification, a tragedy in 3 acts. So that's what enshittification looks like from the outside. Well, what's going on inside the company? What is the pathological mechanism that produces enshittification in these firms? What sci-fi entropy ray are executives pointing at these services that we rely on to turn them into piles of shit? I call that mechanism twiddling. Twiddling is when someone alters the back end of a service in order to change how the business operates. They change the prices, the costs, the search rankings, the recommendation criteria, and other foundational aspects of the system. Now, digital platforms, they're a twiddler's utopia. A grocer would need an army of teenagers on rollerblades with pricing guns to go around the store and reprice the eggs if you walked in looking a little hungry. Whereas McDonald's investments portfolio company Plexure advertises that it can use surveillance data to figure out when a regular customer has just gotten paid and raise the price of their regular breakfast sandwich by $1 that morning. Of course, the prophet William Gibson has told us cyberspace is everting. With digital shelf tags, grocers can change prices whenever they feel like grocers in Norway, whose e-ink shelf tags change their prices 2,000 times a day. Every Uber driver is offered a different wage for every job. If the driver has been picky lately, the job pays more. But if the driver has been desperate enough to say yes to a lot of jobs in a row, the pay goes down and down and down. Now, the law professor Veena Dubal, she calls this algorithmic wage discrimination. It's a prime example of twiddling. Every YouTuber, they know what it means to be twiddled. You work for weeks or months, you spend thousands of dollars making a video, and the algorithm decides that no one, not the people who subscribe to your feed, not the people who type the exact name of your video into the search box, will get to see your video. No one knows why. The algorithm's rules are not public because content moderation is the last redoubt of the bankrupt idea of security through obscurity. YouTube is the kind of shitty boss who docks every paycheck that you receive for all the rules you've broken, but won't tell you what those rules were because maybe you'd figure out how to break them without your boss detecting it next time. Now, twiddling, it sometimes works in users' favor. Sometimes platforms twiddle to make things better for end users or for business customers. For example, Forbes journalist Emily Baker White wrote an excellent investigative piece revealing the existence of a back-end tool on TikTok called the heating tool. When a manager applies the heating tool to a performer's account, that performer's videos are thrust into the feeds of millions of users without regard to whether the recommendation algorithm thinks that those users will like them. Now, why would they do this? Well, here's an analogy from my boyhood. When I was a kid growing up in Toronto, we had a traveling fair that would come every summer called the Canadian National Exhibition, the X. And if you've been to a fair like the X, you know that you can always spot a guy by about 10 o'clock on the midway lugging around a comically large teddy bear. Nominally, the way you win that teddy bear is by getting 5 balls in a peach basket, but to a first approximation, no one has ever managed to get 5 balls in those peach baskets. That guy won the teddy bear when a carny singled him out, gestured him over and said, "Fella, I like your face, so I tell you what I'm gonna do. If you get just 1 ball in the peach basket, I'm gonna give you this keychain, and if you get 2 keychains, I'm gonna let you trade up to the teddy bear." That's how the guy got his teddy bear, which he now has to drag up and down the midway for the whole rest of the day. Now, why did the carny give away this teddy bear? Because it turns that guy into a walking billboard for the Midway Games. If that dopey looking Judas goat can win the galactic scale teddy bear, then so can you. Except you can't. TikTok's heating tool is a way to give away a tactical giant teddy bear. When someone in TikTok's brain trust decides that they need more sports bros on the platform, they pick one bro out at random and they make him king for the day. They heat the shit out of his account. The guy gets a bazillion views and he starts running around all the sports bro forums proclaiming his success. I am the Louis Pasteur of sports content on TikTok. Now, the other sports bros, they pile in and they start retooling to make content tuned to the idiosyncratic formats of TikTok. They lock themselves to the TikTok platform. And when they fail to earn those giant teddy bears of their own, they assume it's because they're doing TikTok wrong, because they don't know about the heating tool. But then the day comes when the TikTok Star Chamber decides we've got enough sports bros on the platform. And so they decide to take the heat off that lucky sports bro and they pick some lucky astrologer out and they make her a queen for the day and the whole project starts all over again. Giant teddy bears are everywhere you look. Back 10 years ago, the New York Times was full of stories about Uber drivers in New York who are earning $90,000 a year driving for Uber, giant teddy bear. Substackers who are making millions of dollars a year, giant teddy bears. Joe Rogan and $250 million from Spotify, giant teddy bear. Those people are all proud owners of giant teddy bears, and those giant teddy bears for the platforms are a steal, because every dollar that they spend giving away from the platform turns into $5 of unpaid labor from people who think they can get a giant teddy bear of their own. Giant teddy bears, they're just one way of twiddling. Platforms can play games with every aspect of their business logic in highly automated ways, which allows them to quickly and efficiently siphon value from end users to business customers, back to end users, hiding a pea in a shell game that is played with hands that operate at machine speeds until they've got everyone so turned around that no one even notices when they take all the value for themselves. And that's the how. How the platforms do the trick where they're first good to users, then lock users in, then maltreat users in order to lure in business customers, and then lock them in, and then maltreat those business customers to harvest all the value for themselves. So this is the how. We know what is happening, we know how it is happening, and all that's left to ask is, why is it happening? There's a very obvious answer to why it's happening, which is that the less value that end users and business customers can claim from the operation of a platform, the more value there is residing in the platform for executives and shareholders to divide among themselves. So that's the why, but it doesn't tell you why now. Companies could have done this shit any time in the past 20 years as platforms grew and grew on the internet, but they didn't, or at least not the successful ones. The ones that turned themselves into piles of shit, they got treated like piles of shit. We avoided them. They died. Do you remember MySpace or Yahoo Search or LiveJournal? Sure, if you go to those websites, you will still see programmatic ads or AI slop, but the websites themselves, they're gone. And that's the clue. It used to be that if you enshittified your product, bad things happened to the company. Now, there are no consequences for enshittification. So everybody is doing it. Let's break that down. What stops companies from enshittifying? There are 4 forces that act as a disciplining outside force on firms. The first one is obvious, it's competition. If customers find it easy to leave, you have to worry about them leaving. Many factors can contribute to how hard or easy it is for a customer to leave a platform, like the network effects that Facebook has going for it. But the most important factor about whether someone is going to leave your platform is whether there's anywhere else for them to go. Now, back in 2012, Facebook bought another platform called Instagram for $1 billion. And that may seem like chump change in these days of 11-digit big tech acquisitions, but that was a big sum back in those innocent days. And it was an especially big sum to pay for Insta, a company that only had 13 employees at the time, and only 25 million registered users, most of whom were not logging in on a monthly basis. But what mattered to Zuckerberg was not how many users Instagram had, it was where those users came from. They were leaving Facebook to join Instagram. They were sick of Facebook, even though they liked the people there. They hated creepy Zuck. They hated the platform. They left, they didn't come back. So Zuckerberg spent a cool $1 billion to capture them. And this is the hilarious part. He put it in writing in a midnight email to his CFO, David Ebersman, explaining that the reason he was paying so much for Instagram was because his users hated him and they loved Insta, and he wanted to rearrange the world so that even if they quit Insta the platform, or Facebook the platform, they would remain captured by Facebook the business. Now on paper, this makes Zuckerberg's acquisition illegal. Normally, that's hard to stop. You have to prove that he bought Instagram with the intention of blocking competition. But in this case, he tripped over his own dick and just like put it in writing. Let's do a murder. It will be premeditated. For avoidance of doubt, this is a murder that is premeditated. But Obama's DOJ and Federal Trade Commission, they just let that one slide. They were following the pro-monopoly policies of Reagan, Bush 1, Clinton, and Bush 2, and setting an example that Trump followed, greenlighting giga mergers like the catastrophic and incestuous Warner Discovery merger. Indeed, for 40 years, starting with Carter, accelerating through Reagan, the US has encouraged monopoly formation as an official policy on the grounds that monopolies are efficient. If everyone's using Google search, that should tell you that we should be celebrating because they have the very best search. And wouldn't it be perverse for us to spend public funds punishing a company for making a service that everyone likes better than all the other ones? But as we know, Google did not maintain its search dominance by being the best search engine. They did it by paying bribes. More than $20 billion every year to Apple alone to be the default search on iOS, plus billions more to Samsung, Verizon, Mozilla, and everyone else with a product, service, or network with a search box on it, ensuring that you would never stumble onto a search engine that was better than Google, which in turn ensured that no one would invest in a rival search engine, even if they were visibly, obviously superior to what Google was offering. Why bother making something better than Google if Google buys up all the market oxygen before it can kindle your idea into life? Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, these are not making things companies, they are buying things companies. They take advantage of official tolerance for anti-competitive acquisitions, predatory pricing, market distorting exclusivity deals, and other acts that are specifically prohibited by statute, and they became too big to fail, which made them too big to jail, which meant that eventually they became too big to care. Which is why Google search is a pile of shit, and everything on Amazon is dropship garbage that instantly disintegrates into a cloud of volatile organic compounds the minute you open the box. Once companies no longer fear losing your business to a competitor, it's much easier for them to treat you badly, because what are you going to do? You'll remember Lily Tomlin doing those AT&T ads on SNL, where she would turn to the camera at the end of them and say, "We don't care, we don't have to, we're the phone company." Competition was the first force that served to discipline companies and the enshittificatory impulses of their leadership. And 40 years ago, we just stopped enforcing competition law. Now, it takes a very smooth-brained kind of asshole, that is, an establishment economist, to insist that the collapse of every industry from eyeglasses to vitamin C into a cartel of 5 or fewer companies has nothing to do with 40 years of policy that officially encouraged monopolization. It's like we used to put down rat poison, and we didn't have a rat problem. Then 40 years ago, these guys insisted that the rat poison wasn't necessary, and now rats are gnawing our faces off. And they're saying, who is to say where all these rats came from? Maybe it was that we told you to stop putting down rat poison. But if you consider the possibility that this is just the time of the rats, that the great forces of history have borne down upon this moment to increase the fecundity of rats beyond all historical precedent. Antitrust did not slip and fall down that staircase and land spine first on a stiletto. They stabbed it in the back and then they pushed it. And when they killed antitrust, they killed regulation, which is the second force that disciplines companies. Now, regulation is possible, but only when the regulator is more powerful than the entities that they regulate. When a company gets bigger than the government, it gets damned hard to credibly threaten to punish that company, no matter what sins it commits. That's what protected IBM for all those years when it had its boot on the throat of the American tech sector. Did you know that the DOJ fought to break up IBM from 1970 to 1982, a period they call antitrust's Vietnam, and that for 12 consecutive years, IBM spent more on antitrust lawyers to fight one case at the DOJ than the DOJ paid for every lawyer fighting every antitrust case in the United States. They outspent the United States government for 12 years, and that money paid off because by 1982, the president was Ronald Reagan, a man whose official policy was that monopolies were efficient, and he dropped the case and Big Blue wriggled off the hook. It's hard to regulate a monopolist. It's hard to regulate a cartel. But when a company is composed of hundreds of competing firms, or when a sector is composed of hundreds of competing firms, the one thing we know about them is that they're competing. They're genuinely fighting with one another. They're trying to poach each other's best customers, each other's best workers. They are at each other's throats. It's hard enough for a couple hundred executives to agree on anything, but when they're legitimately competing with one another, really obsessing about how to eat one another's lunch, they can't agree on anything. The second any one of them goes to their regulator with some bullshit story, like it's impossible to have a search engine that doesn't spy on you, or it's impossible to have a secure and easy to use mobile device unless the vendor gets a veto over which software you can install, or it's impossible to have an ISP unless they slow down traffic to the websites you want in order to drive you to the websites that will pay bribes for premium carriage, there will be another company there saying, no, that's bullshit. We managed it. Here's our server logs, here's our cache books, and here's our customer testimonials. When you have 100 companies, you have a rabble, you have a mob. They can't agree on a common lobbying position. They are too busy eating each other's lunch to agree on how to cater the meeting where they would agree on that lobbying position. But let those 100 companies merge to monopoly. Let them absorb one another in an incestuous orgy, turn into 5 giant companies so inbred that they have corporate Habsburg jaws, and they will become a cartel. And it's easy for a cartel to agree on what bullshit they're going to feed their regulator, and to mobilize some of the excess billions they have retained by not having to waste their money on competition so that they can capture the regulators completely. You know, Congress used to have federal privacy laws. We used to make new consumer laws, not anymore. The last time Congress managed to make a Consumer Privacy Act in this country was in 1988. It's a law called the Video Privacy Protection Act. It's a law that bans video store clerks from telling newspapers which VHS cassettes you took home. A law that regulates 2 things that don't exist and 1 thing that barely exists anymore. The threat of having your video rental history out there in the public eye was not the last urgent threat to American privacy that the public faced, and yet Congress has been deadlocked on passing privacy law since the rise of the internet. Tech companies' regulatory capture involves a risible and transparent gambit that is so stupid it is an insult to good, hard-working, risible, transparent gambits. Namely, they claim that when they violate your consumer privacy or labor rights, it's not a crime so long as they do it with an app. This is something Arizonans should be very familiar with. It's not a crime if landlords fix your rent, provided they do it with an app. That's RealPage's claim. Algorithmic wage discrimination. That's not illegal wage theft. We did it with an app. Spying on you from asshole to appetite. Not a crime. We did it with an app. Amazon's scam where each search tricks you into paying 29% more than you would if they gave you a faithful and accurate reply to your search. Not a ripoff, so long as you do it with an app. Once we kill competition, once we stop putting down that rat poison, we got cartels. The rats came and they ate our faces. And the cartels captured their regulators, which is like the rats buying out the poison factories and shutting them down. And now companies are no longer constrained by competition, nor are they constrained by regulation. But you know what? This is tech. And tech is different. Not different because it's more important, but different because it is more flexible. Because our computers are these marvelous things called Turing-complete universal von Neumann machines that can run every valid program. That means that any enshittificatory alteration to a computer-based product or service can be disenshittified with another program. Every time HP jacks up the price of ink, they invite a competitor to market refill kits or compatible cartridges. If Tesla installs code that says you have to pay an extra monthly fee to charge your whole battery and have it fully discharged before you have to recharge it, they're inviting a modder to start selling a kit to jailbreak that battery so that you can charge it all the way up. Let me take you through a little example of how that works. Imagine instead of being at a con, we're at a tech company, maybe where you'll be on Monday, and we're having a product design meeting for our company's website. And the guy leading the meeting, he puts his hand, he says, all right, dudes, you know that our top line KPI is ad revenue. Well, I've calculated that we can make if we make the ads 20% more invasive and obnoxious, we can increase top line ad revenue by 2%. And this is a very good pitch. Everyone around the table likes it. You hit that KPI, everybody gets a fat bonus. We can all take our families on a luxury ski vacation in Switzerland this Christmas. But here's the thing. Someone around that table is going to stick their arm up. Someone who does not give a shit about user safety, user experience, or the quality of the product. And that person is going to say, I love how you think, Elon. But has it occurred to you that if we made the ads 20% more obnoxious, that might spur 40% of our users to go to the search engine and type, how do I stop seeing ads? I mean, what a fucking nightmare. Because after a user does that, the revenue from that user, it's not the status quo ante, 100%, what we used to get. Certainly doesn't rise to the 102% we were anticipating with the new, more invasive ads. The revenue from that user goes to zero, and it never comes back, because no user in history has ever gone back to the search engine and typed, I missed the ads, how can I start seeing them again? Once the user jailbreaks their phone, or discovers third-party ink, or develops a relationship with an independent Tesla mechanic who unlocks all the DLC in their car, that user is gone forever. Interoperability, that latent property bequeathed to us by Herrs von Neumann and Turing and their infinitely flexible universal machines, is a serious check on enshittification. The fact that Congress hasn't passed a privacy law since 1988 is countered, at least in part, by the fact that the majority of internet users, 52% of them, are running web-based ad blockers, which are also tracker blockers. But no one has ever installed a tracker blocker for an app, because reverse engineering an app puts you in jeopardy of felony prosecution under Section 1201 of the 1998 Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which carries a penalty of a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine for a first offense. And violating terms of service puts you in jeopardy under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act of 1986, a law that Ronald Reagan signed in a panic after watching the movie War Games. I'm not making that up. Helping users violate their terms of service can get you hit with a lawsuit for tortious interference with contract, and then there's trademark, copyright, patent, all the nonsense that we call IP, but which Jay Friedman and the CEDIA project calls felony contempt of business model. So we're still at that planning meeting. We moved on to the next agenda item, which is the ads in the app. And the guy running the meeting says, okay, so we're going to leave the website as it is, but why don't we make the ads in the app 20% more obnoxious and invasive and get that 2% ad revenue? And once again, that big mouth's hand goes up and he says, why are we stopping at 20%? Why don't we make the ads 100% more obnoxious and get a 10% boost in revenue? Because it doesn't matter if the user goes to the search engine and types, how do I stop seeing ads in this app? Because the answer is, you cannot. So YOLO, like let's just enshittify away. IP has become a euphemism for any law that lets me reach beyond the walls of my company and exert control over my competitors, my critics, and my customers. An app is just a euphemism for a web page wrapped in the right kind of IP so that it's a felony to modify it so that it serves you instead of the company that made it. Interoperability used to stop companies from enshittifying. If a company made its clients suck, someone rolled out an alternative client. If they ripped a feature out and wanted to sell it to you as a extra pay upgrade, someone would make a compatible plugin that restored it for free or a one-time charge. To help people flee MySpace, Facebook gave them a bot. You gave that bot your login and your password, and it would go and pretend to be you on MySpace several times a day, grab the waiting messages out of your inbox, go back to Facebook, put them in your inbox there, you could reply to them and it would autopilot them back out onto MySpace. So that way you didn't have to choose between the people you loved, who are all on MySpace, and Facebook, a service whose promise to the public in 2006, when they opened up Beyond American College Kids, is we're like MySpace, but we will never, ever spy on you. You remember that? Thanks to the metastasis of IP, all of that is off the table today. Apple, they owe their very existence to the iWork suite, Pages, Numbers, and Keynote, which can read and write Microsoft Excel, Word, and PowerPoint. But make an iOS runtime that plays back the files you bought from the Apple stores on other platforms, and Apple is going to nuke you until you glow. Facebook wouldn't have had a chance of beating MySpace's grip on social media power without its scraper. But scrape Facebook today in service of an alternative client, their lawyers will bomb you until the rubble bounces. Google scraped every website in the world to create its search index. Try and scrape Google to put your head on a pike. When they did it, it was progress. When you do it, it's piracy. every pirate wants to be an admiral. And because this handful of companies has so thoroughly captured their regulators, they can wield the power of the state against you when you try to break their grip on you, even as their own flagrant violations of our rights go unpunished, so long as they commit those violations with an app. Tech lost its fear of regulation, it neutralized the threat from regulators, and then it put them in harness to attack new startups that might undo them, as they did, that might do unto them as they did unto the companies that came before them. But even so, there was one force that remained that kept tech in check, and that was its workforce. Tech workers have historically been in short supply, and that gave them a lot of power, and their bosses knew it. To get tech workers to work crazy hours, they came up with a trick. They appealed to tech workers' love of technology. They told them they were the heroes of a digital revolution, who would organize the world's information and make it useful or bring the world closer together. They brought in expert set dressers and turned their workplaces into whimsical campuses with free laundry, gourmet cafeterias, massages, kombucha, and a surgeon who'd freeze your eggs so you could work through your fertile years. They convinced you that you were being pampered and not worked like a government mule. Now this trick has a name. Fobazi Ettar, the librarian theorist, she calls it vocational awe. Elon Musk, he calls it being extremely hardcore. And it worked well. Tech workers put in some long-ass hours, but for their bosses, the trick failed badly. Because if you miss your mother's funeral to hit a deadline, and then your boss orders you to enshittify that product, you are going to experience a profound sense of moral injury, and you're going to make sure that your boss shares that feeling. Because what the fuck are they going to do? Fire you? They can't hire someone else to do your job, and you can get a job that's even better at the shop across the street. So workers, they held the line when competition, regulation, and interoperability failed. But eventually, supply caught up with demand. In 2023, tech fired 260,000 workers. In the first 6 months of 2024, another 100,000 workers left. You can't tell your boss to go fuck himself anymore, because they'll fire your ass and give your job to someone who'll be only too happy to enshittify that product that you built. That's why all of this is happening now. It's not that our bosses are different. They didn't catch a mind virus that turned them into greedy assholes who don't care about our users' well-being or the quality of the products that we made. As far as our bosses have always been concerned, the point of their business was to charge the most while delivering the least and sharing as little as possible with suppliers, employees, customers, and anyone who wasn't shareholders and executives. They're not running charities, right? The point is to retain as much earning as you can. Since day one, those bosses showed up for work, and they grabbed the giant lever behind their desk marked Enshittification, and they pulled it as hard as they could. But the lever barely moved. It was all gummed up by competition, by regulation, by interoperability, and by their own workers. As those sources of friction melted away, that Enshittification lever started to move very freely. And that sucks, I know. But think about this for a sec. Our bosses, despite being wildly imperfect vessels incapable of rationalizing endless greed and cheating, nevertheless presided over a period in which services were actually great, not because they used to be better people, but because they used to be subject to discipline. So it follows that if we want to end the Enshitticene, dismantle the Enshitternet, and build a new good internet that our bosses can't wreck, we need to make sure that those constraints that used to operate on them are durably installed on that new good internet, wound around its nerves and its roots. And then we have to stand guard on it, over it, so that it can't be dismantled again. A new good internet brings forward the positive aspects of that old good internet, that ethic of technological self-determination, where users of technology and hackers, tinkerers, startups, and others who served as their proxies got to reconfigure and mod the technology they used so that it did what they needed it to do and couldn't be used against them. But the new good internet also has to fix the defects of the old good internet, the part that made it hard for anyone to use the internet who wasn't us. And yeah, of course we can do that. Our bosses, they swear it's impossible, that you can't have a conversation with a friend without sharing it with Zuck, that you can't search the web without letting Google spy on you, that you can't have a phone that works reliably without Apple giving you a veto over your software. They claim that it's not a nonsense to even ponder this kind of thing, that it's like making water that's not wet. But that is bullshit. We can have nice things. We can build things for the people we love and give them a place that's worthy of their time and attention. And to do that, we have to install constraints. The first constraint is competition. We are living through an epochal shift in competition policy. After 40 years of antitrust enforcement in an induced coma, a wave of antitrust vigor has swept through governments all over the world. Regulators are stepping in to ban monopolistic practices, open up walled gardens, block anti-competitive mergers, and unwind corrupt mergers that were undertaken on false pretenses. Now, normally this is where I would list out a series of victories that the agencies have had. When I first gave this speech, it came at a remarkable moment. 1 week after a court ruled that Google was an illegal monopolist and opened up the door for enforcement action up to and including breakups. We are living through an environment where firms are acting differently even before the judgments are coming down. This summer, Wiz, a startup, noped out of the largest ever acquisition offer for a startup in history, turning down a $23 billion acquisition offer from Google and deciding to just be a fucking business that made a product that people liked, that made money for them. So, sorry, let me skip ahead here. So it was pretty fucking epic this summer. And this antitrust stuff, it's pretty esoteric, and I'm not going to gatekeep you or shame you if you want to keep a little distance on this subject. Nearly everyone is an antitrust normie, and that is absolutely okay. But if you're a normie, you're probably only catching little bits and pieces of this narrative. And let me tell you, monopolists know it, and they are flooding the zone. So the Wall Street Journal has published over 100 editorials declaiming FTC Chair Lina Khan for being a do-nothing who accomplishes nothing. Rupert Murdoch owns the Wall Street Journal. He's a very canny and flinty old fellow. He does not pay his editorial board to write 100 editorials about someone who's not doing anything. The reality is that in the USA for the last 4 years, even if not for the next 4 years, in the UK, in the EU, in Australia, in Canada, even in China, we are seeing more antitrust action over the past 4 years than over the 40 years that preceded it. Now, all that stuff is going to continue through 2025, even if the Trump administration changes policy, though they might not. We have state attorneys general in red states who are quite happy about antitrust. There's a lot of reasons to think about this. Sometimes I think it's principled. Sometimes I think it's cynical. I think there are attorneys general in low-tax states that understand that raising taxes in the state is very unpopular, but also not having roads is very unpopular. And they see extracting large antitrust settlements from firms, woke capitalist firms, to be a productive way to resolve this conundrum. Sometimes it's culture war performance. My friend Riley Quinn from the Trash Future podcast says that if we were to adapt the land acknowledgement that comes before a lot of talks where people say, we are giving this talk on stolen land, but instead we had every social media executive start up and stand up before every board meeting and say we are doing this on the stolen likes of conservative culture warriors that we shadow banned, that it would satisfy people on the right. But there is going to be some enforcement there, not least. We had J.D. Vance say that Lina Khan was the only Biden enforcer that he liked. But we're also going to see it happening at the state level in states that have purple or blue regulations. So many of you know that in the Arizona state race, that an issue that came up again and again was your Attorney General Chris Mays, who went after RealPage, which is a company that coordinates among landlords to illegally price fix rents. They control 70% of the rents in Phoenix and 50% of the rents in Tucson, and it presided over a period of significantly above inflation rent increases in both cities through illegal mechanisms, and she brought a state antitrust action against them. Remember, we don't need to pass new laws to enforce antitrust. Competition law is actually pretty robust. The problem isn't the law, it's the enforcement priorities. Reagan put antitrust in mothballs 40 years ago, but that elegant weapon from a more civilized age is now back in the hands of people who know how to use it, and they're really swinging for the fences. The people like antitrust. It is a popular issue. Smashing corporate power, smashing corporate bullying, smashing price fixing. So the next step, if we can revive antitrust, is to revive regulation. As the seemingly inescapable power of tech giants is revealed for the sham that it always was, Governments and regulators are finally getting interested in killing that one weird trick of violating our rights and saying it doesn't matter because they did it with an app. So in the EU this year, we got the enforcement of the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act. Under the DMA, dominant platforms are required to have APIs so that smaller companies run by startups, co-ops, nonprofits, local governments, and others can plug straight into them. So you can leave Facebook, go to another platform, but send messages to the people you left behind and participate in the groups that you left behind. So you no longer have switching costs. You no longer have a collective action problem. And that is a very cool rule. But what's even more interesting is how the EU has implemented it, because they've moved enforcement from the nations to the federal government in the EU. So some of you may be familiar with a landmark EU privacy law called the GDPR, the General Data Privacy Regulation. You may also know that it's been useless. The big tech firms still spy on Europeans the way that they did 8 years ago when the GDPR was passed, 9 years ago. And the reason for that is European federalism. All the tech companies pretend that their headquarters are in Ireland because Ireland is a tax haven, which makes it a crime haven. If you're a tax haven, that means that your revenue comes from companies that are so good with spreadsheets that they can pretend to be Irish this week. And if they're able to pretend to be Irish this week, they can pretend to be Luxembourgian or Maltese or Cypriot or even Dutch next week. And that means that you have to keep sweetening the pot to keep these footloose companies from leaving. And the way that you do that is by not enforcing other laws. So those companies stay there. Every tax haven becomes a crime haven because tax havens only attract money that can move. And so you have to keep the money there. And so in Ireland, the data commissioner basically barely gets out of bed. And when they do, they don't put on pants. They sit around in their underwear all day, eating breakfast cereal and watching cartoons, right? We do not see major cases going forward in Ireland, and on the rare occasions they do, they are overturned by the Federal European Court after 7 or 8 years have gone by. And this is how this has managed to continue for all these years. In Europe, they know about this. And so the new European tech regulations, they start enforcement in the European federal courts. There's no reason for European federal judges to entertain this obvious bullshit. It's not a crime, we did it with an app. And here in the US, the dam is breaking on federal privacy law, finally. Remember, the last privacy law was passed in 1988 to protect the sanctity of your VHS rental history. It has been a minute. And the thing is, there are a lot of people on every side of the political spectrum for whom this lack of privacy law is a serious problem. They don't always even agree with each other's causes, but they all agree that we need privacy. So maybe you think that, Facebook made your grampy into a QAnon, or that Insta made your kid into an anorexic, or that cops are rolling up the identities of everyone who shows up at a Black Lives Matter demonstration or the January 6 riots by serving reverse warrants on Google, or that red state attorneys general follow teenagers across state lines into abortion clinics, or that racialized people are discriminated against in hiring, lending, housing, and other protected categories by algorithms that spy on them, or maybe that someone is making an AI deepfake porn of you. And these are all different issues. Not everyone agrees on all of them. Very few people will agree on all of them. But a federal privacy law with a private right of action that allows individuals to take action even when state or federal prosecutors won't act on their behalf, that federal privacy law would go a long way to solving all of them. And that is a big coalition. And this is why we are seeing new privacy laws being introduced in every session of Congress, each one better than the last, steadily improving. And what about self-help? How are we doing on making interoperability legal again? So hackers can just fix shit without waiting for Congress, especially the Congress we're about to get, or a federal agency, especially the federal agencies we're about to get, to act. The action here these days, it's in the states on right to repair bills. We're getting state right to repair bills that ban using the kind of IP that's against the law to circumvent in devices. So in Oregon, you can no longer sell electronics where you use parts pairing to lock parts to a device so that an independent repair shop can't fix it. In Colorado, you're no longer allowed to use parts pairing if you make a powered wheelchair, so that the people who want to service and maintain those powered wheelchairs no longer need to contend with anti-circumvention law and the DMCA in order to do it. So we're getting more and more of this at the state level. And then the final piece of this is the tech workforce. For years, tech bosses tricked their workers into thinking that they were founders in waiting, temporarily embarrassed entrepreneurs, momentarily drawing a salary, that they certainly weren't workers, that their power came from some intrinsic virtue, and not like those lazy Slavs in unions who just had their jobs handed to them. It was a trick, it was a scam The power that they had came from scarcity, and when the scarcity ended, so did the power. The only durable source for any kind of worker, including a tech worker, is as a worker in a union. So in the last program item I did in this room, we talked about Amazon. Warehouse workers at Amazon, they piss in bottles, and they have the highest rate of on-the-job injuries of any warehouse worker in the sector. Where Amazon coders get to show up for work wearing black t-shirts that say things their bosses don't understand with pink mohawks and facial piercings. They get to piss whenever they want. This is not because Andy Jassy or Jeff Bezos likes programmers and hates warehouse workers. It's because they're scared that those tech workers will quit and they don't know how to replace them. Second William Gibson reference, the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. The people who are living in the future are Amazon blue-collar workers. They are at the bleeding edge. Drivers whose eyeballs are monitored by AI cameras that do digital phrenology on their faces and figure out whether to dock their pay. Warehouse workers whose bodies are ruined in months. As tech bosses beef up the reserve army of unemployed, desperate, skilled tech workers, then those tech workers are going to arrive at the same future as those warehouse workers. I know tech workers have spent their careers explaining in words so small even their bosses can understand them that they refuse to enshittify those products, and I thank them for their service. But if you want to go on fighting for the user, you need power that comes from something more durable than scarcity. You need a union. Now, we're coming into 4 years of retreat for progressive politics. There's no way around it. But last year, when the new president of the UAW, Sean Fain, the first democratically elected president of the UAW in a generation, led a historic strike to victory against all three of the big three automakers. He set the expiry date for that contract as 2028, the next election year. And he's called on every other union leader who negotiates a contract to set the expiry for that contract as 2028, which is the only way under the Taft-Hartley Act that you can have a legal general strike. Unions are one of the only things that get stronger under Republican administrations. Progressive movements don't. Right? Under the Obama administration, we got very powerful progressive movements because they weren't fighting for their lives as they were fighting for justice. That's where we got Black Lives Matter. That's where we got Occupy. But under Trump, we didn't get any strong, successful social movements because people were too busy fighting for survival. But what we did get were strong, powerful, successful unions. Right? The union movement that we have today, this new surge in union organizing, started with Red for Ed. It started with teacher strikes in red states under Trump. This is the environment under which we should be doing labor organizing. Enshittification didn't arise because our bosses changed. They were always that guy, always yanking on the enshittification lever that comes pre-installed in every C-suite. What changed was the environment, the stuff that stopped that switch from moving. And that is good news in a bank shot way, because it means that imperfect people can make good services. And as a wildly imperfect person myself, I find this heartening. A new good internet is in our grasp, an internet that has the technological self-determination of that old good internet, but the grease skid simplicity of Web 2.0 that let all our normie friends get in on the fun. Tech bosses want you to think that good UX and enshittification can't ever be separated, but that's such a self-serving proposition, you can spot it from orbit. We know it's bullshit. We built the old good internet, and we've been fighting a rearguard action to preserve it for 2 decades. It's time to stop playing defense. It's time to go on offense. To restore competition, regulation, interoperability, and especially tech worker power, so that we can create a new good internet that we're going to need if we're going to fight fascism, the climate emergency, and genocide. To build that digital nervous system for the 21st century in which our children can thrive and prosper. Thank you. All right, so we got 5 minutes. Yeah.
Well, I agree with like 95% of what you said.
Yeah.
I will say that, and one of the things I've been pounding the drum of the lack of enforcement of antitrust law for years. I happen to be a lawyer.
Yeah.
Though I would, man, I hesitate to bring this up, but I kind of.
Sure.
You
Go ahead.
talk about the last privacy law we passed.
Consumer privacy law. Consumer privacy law.
Oh, gotcha. So you know.
Not counting HIPAA.
Okay. That was the big.
Consumer privacy law.
Okay. So yeah, that's not. Okay. That was the one thing I was.
Sure.
HIPAA. But I will tell you this, HIPAA's a joke.
I know. Speaking as someone...
It's not a joke if you're a healthcare worker, because they'll use it to punish you.
Sure, it's got all the downsides of a privacy law, none of the upsides.
But like, for example, one of the things that I know about HIPAA is that they've breached, at one point, when I was still tracking it, that they breached like 1/3 of all healthcare files in the United States, and theoretically, that would be a 1 year, that'd be like a $5,000 fine per
record.
So basically, every insurance company, every healthcare worker, every medical office, insurance company, everybody is at the whim of a federal prosecutor that doesn't destroy them.
Yeah, the answer to a bad privacy law is not no privacy law. It's a better privacy law.
Right.
I agree.
That's exactly, that's the world we live in. That basically, that all of those companies exist at the whim of a government prosecutor, because they can destroy anyone they choose at any medical office, anybody.
Yeah. So we need a better medical privacy law. I agree.
Oh, and that means that basically it's authoritarian power, because if you can destroy anybody,
it opens the door to selective enforcement. I understand. No, I agree. I just think that we shouldn't counsel despair on that basis.
Yeah, we need a better privacy law.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Does the leanness of the supply chain and culturally make it vulnerable to like micro strikes, where people take one day where they underproduce it?
Yeah, there are a lot of pinch points that are serious vulnerabilities that can be used tactically against large firms. I mean, this is what we just saw with the dock worker strike. That lean supply chain is predicated on the idea that nothing bad will ever happen. And you know, I've been thinking about the rise of private equity and the extractive businesses as being a bit like the extraction of fossil fuels. So we have this long period where you have these happy microbes sucking up sunshine and turning it into carbon and just sinking to the bottom of the sea, and producing a lot of rich, energy-dense material. And then you have a generation that comes along and just takes it out and burns it. And I think we had under a period of more prudent corporate regulation and more public investment, the creation of a lot of value. And part of that, one of the epiphenomena of that creation of a lot of public value was better policy, right? Like, one of the reasons we have deadlocks, like as a Canadian, I find ACA very horrifying. It's better than what we had before, but it's terrible. It's legitimately, people who say ACA is good are wrong. ACA is a very bad law, and the reason it's as bad as it is because large firms dominated the negotiation over ACA and watered it down and neutered it and so on. So this period in which we had good policy that produced productive businesses has ended, and we are now in the cash out period, right? What some have called the age of redemption, where all of the value that was put in these firms, firms that have real estate holdings so that they're not exposed to rent shocks, firms that have cash reserves so they're not exposed to economic shocks, firms that keep reserve staff so they can manage peak load or manage occasions that only happen occasionally, circumstances only arise occasionally, are seeing excess staff cut, cash reserves liquidated, real estate holdings sold out from under them with a sale leaseback arrangement, being exposed to all kinds of shocks, and the people involved make out like bandits, right? They burn the carbon, right? And then they walk away, and there's no way to replenish that, right? It's just gone. I confess that I don't think capitalism is the answer to everything, but I think if you think capitalism is a good answer to things, then you should want productive businesses, not extractive ones. And I think that the environment for governance has collapsed, and we are seeing the triumph of extraction over production.
Cory, one of the things that you focused on was the idea of scarcity and the tech worker having a better run at it because they're a scarce resource. And you know as well as I do that one of the reasons why there's so much investment in AI for generating code and hardware designs is precisely because they've already targeted that as a place
I agree.
to move that scarcity. What do you think about the movement to AI law in Europe and how something like that here would be helpful in that?
So I think that the right lens to look at AI law through is a labor lens. I don't know that the European law does that very well, but I think that that's the right lens to look at it through. I don't want to block the next panel. Sorry, guys. Thank you all very much.